Here's a question for you. How many British streets can you name and describe completely simultaneously? Granted, there are several that give a strong hint as to their function, such as Market Square, Church Lane, Station Road, etc. But there's one specific street whose name is entirely self-descriptive, comprising an adjective and noun, and which fortunately enough happens to be one of the most iconic streets in the country. So let me give you a little virtual tour featuring the former tallest building in the world and all manner of architecture from Tudor, Norman and even Roman, and not just a pile of rubble either. This is the story of a steep hill named Steep Hill. If you've not come across this street before, you might assume we're looking at a town on the fringe of one of Britain's mountainous regions. Well, think again, because we are in fact in Lincolnshire, somewhere I'm more than familiar with as it happens, considering it's my county of upbringing. Not to bore you with autobiographical details, but just to point out that I'm all too aware of the stereotypes, the most relevant to this being that Lincolnshire is quote-unquote flat. Clearly, some people have never enjoyed a hike through Hubbard's Hills, or tobogganed down the escarpments of the Lincolnshire Wolds on snow days, or paid a visit to its namesake county town, the city of Lincoln. Which brings us back to the point, since this is the place you're looking at, a city whose name alone hints at its vast history, being that it's a contraction of its Roman name, Lindum Colonia, which in turn is derived from the Brittonic Lindon, meaning lake or pool, presumably in reference to Brayford Pool, about half a mile to the south. And considering we're heading directly for a 3rd century gateway, which will feature shortly, it's reasonable to assume that this is a Roman road, and a rather famous one at that. Ermine Street. This connected Lincoln all the way to London back in the days of Britain's Latin colonisation. And speaking of which, the Colonia, alluded to in the suffix of the city to this day, highlights just how important it was, given that it refers to the highest grade of settlement in the Roman Empire, and one of just 4 in Britain ever to attain it, with the other 3 being Colchester, Gloucester and York. These coloniae were essentially luxury communities for retired soldiers, and in Lincoln's case it was protected by a hilltop fortress, a steep hilltop fortress as it happens, around the point where Ermine Street converges with the Fosse Way, which goes southwest all the way to Exeter. The Romans abandoned Britain in the early 5th century, leaving very little by way of surviving architecture, with a particular exception which you'll see shortly. Their withdrawal is far from the end of the story behind this street though. During the early Anglo-Saxon era, this would have been the centre of the kingdom of Lindsey, which would later be absorbed into Northumbria, and later still would become one of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw after the Vikings invaded in the 9th century. Precise details on this period are notoriously scarce, but it seems reasonable to assume that much of the defensive walls built by the Romans would have been left untouched, so as to serve the same purpose for the new tenants. But it was the era to follow that would take Lincoln to new heights, in more ways than one. This will all become clear as we reach the summit of Steep Hill, punctuated by the triple gables of the city's Visitor Information Centre of 16th century origin. It's no exaggeration to say that this is one of the most historically significant pedestrianised crossroads in Britain. Turning to the left brings us to Lincoln Castle. Dating from 1068, this in itself shows that William the Conqueror was wasting no time in asserting dominance here, and following the lead of the Romans at that, being that it's on the site of their legionary fortress, with even some recycled stone from the old Colonia. Of course, placing a castle on a hilltop is a completely logical early town planning decision, but what's much more unusual is what's directly behind us. I'm speaking, of course, of Lincoln Cathedral, consecrated in 1092 at a time when this was the fifth largest settlement in England behind Winchester, London, York and Norwich, which we can assert thanks to the Domesday Book. Its position less than 200 metres from the castle was almost certainly a statement of Norman intent to dominate the subjugated Anglo-Saxons, both militarily and ecclesiastically, a statement which would be elevated, in a very literal sense, by the Plantagenets in the 14th century. By 1311, a new central tower was built, topped with a spire reaching a staggering height of 160 metres, or 525 feet. But wait, what spire, you may be asking? Well, the one that was standing up until 1548, when it collapsed in a raging storm. But for over 200 years prior to this, Lincoln Cathedral was the tallest man-made structure in the world, surpassing even the Great Pyramid of Giza. Here's how it would have looked before the collapse, although how much awe it would have inspired from several miles away looking towards this hill we can only imagine. That just leaves one side street to explore, or rather the northern continuation of Steep Hill, Bailgate. This would have been the approximate site of the Roman Forum, which today is a trendy shopping and dining area where visitors can take a well-earned break to catch their breath. And for the record, it's only as quiet as this during the break of dawn, in case you were wondering. At the end of Bailgate is one of the oldest structures in Britain, Newport Arch. Built in circa 200 AD, according to Lincoln Museum, this is said to be the oldest arch in the UK still used by traffic today. It was the northern gateway into the Colonia. Carrying on further north would take us onto the A15, that being the famous road leading to a junction near Scunthorpe in almost an entirely straight line for over 20 miles, hinting at Ermine Street's continuation into York, or Eboracum to the Romans. But let's backtrack to our subject matter, since you may suspect that the views are better on the descent. With an average gradient of around 16 degrees, and reaching a maximum of 20, this is claimed by Ordnance Survey to be the fourth steepest street in England. Excavations have shown that the Romans used steps here. It's likely the name originated from the Norman era or later, since it's notably different from the nearby streets of Bailgate, Eastgate and Westgate, typically Viking street names. The street of today is a trove of boutique shops, tea rooms, chocolatiers and the like, spanning a range of eclectic yet cohesive architectural styles, including Georgian, Tudor and even Norman. As it happens, there's a good chance that the Normans were the ones responsible for turning this into a street with buildings in the first place, in spite of the challenges posed by the foundations. The house on the left-hand side of the shop now, for instance, dates from the 12th century, with a well-earned Grade 1 listed status. So, what's in a name, anyway? Well, the literal nature of Steep Hill seems to serve both as a selling point and as a warning in equal measure, and perhaps a necessary warning given the aforementioned perception of Lincolnshire being a flat county, as if the fenlands in the south are indicative of the Shire as a whole. Are there other streets in Britain with equally self-descriptive names? Quite possibly, and you'd be welcome to throw examples in the comments, but very few, if any, could boast a backstory as impressive as this one. So if you fancy an alternative UK city break, why not give Lincoln a look? Just be sure to wear sturdy shoes. Thanks for watching and have a great day.